Before we get started, I want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so that you don't miss any of the content that is released by GoCollect. And if you're interested, head over to Regie Collects here on YouTube. Regie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector and the host of the GoCollect speculation video, and I want to welcome you to another episode. In this episode, we are going to take a look at several blog posts that have been sent in to GoCollect by bloggers. And I will tell you that these blog posts are solid. Before we get to the blog post, I want to encourage you to check out the GoCollect swag shop. And I'm actually wearing one of the new shirts that is in the swag shop. I encourage you to head over there, check it out. And if you use my discount code Regie, you can actually save yourself a couple of bucks. With that said, let's look at the blog post. This first blog post is all about death. we are literally talking about the death of comic book characters. But in this first blog post, the blogger takes a look at two books, one from Marvel and one from DC, that involve the death of some pretty important characters. The very first book that the blogger talks about is Superman issue number 75. And this book is essentially where Superman is killed by Doomsday. Something that many people never thought would actually happen, that being the death of Superman, but it definitely happened in this book. The blogger actually points out that there are an estimated 6 million copies of this book out there, or I should say that had at least been produced, but he also highlights that there is a platinum version of this book that is limited to around 10,000 copies. And I don't think that I've ever seen the platinum copy, but I do know that I have a few copies of Superman 75 in my collection. And I'm curious, if you have one of those platinum copies, give us a shout down in the comment section. I am curious if anyone actually has one in their possession. With that said, the second book that the blogger takes a look at is one that is related to Marvel, and specifically my favorite character, that being Spider-Man. The blogger specifically talks about Amazing Spider-Man issue number 121. And this book is where Gwen Stacy meets her death, essentially at the hands of Peter Parker to some degree or another. And if you've never read this story before, essentially what happens is that the Green Goblin throws Gwen Stacy from a bridge. Peter, Spider-Man, attempts to save her, and in the process of doing so, her neck is broken. And this is in many ways a pivotal moment for Peter Parker and for Spider-Man. So again, two really awesome death-related comics. There are many more out there. As I mentioned, again, heroes and villains and side characters die all the time. So there is a plethora of death books out there. But I think the blogger did a pretty solid job of highlighting at least two really cool books that you may want to check out. Typically in this speculation video, we focus on those books that have become hot for one reason or another. Oftentimes it's related to a movie or a TV show or some kind of announcement. But our next blogger actually takes a slightly different approach. Instead of talking about the hot book, what he is choosing to do is to highlight some books that have actually appreciated in value over time. And in every case, these books have basically doubled in value from roughly 2013, 2015 to present day. Every single book has doubled in value, where there is like a nice little trajectory of growth. And so again, this is a pretty interesting blog post that you may want to check out. Again, the link is down in the description. Given the incredible prices that we are seeing for comic books right now in the present day, because of all the announcements that are coming out, it is increasingly harder to find books that are undervalued that also have some significance associated with them. And I'll be completely honest, I'm actually a little jealous that I did not come up with the list that our next blogger did, because the books that he identified in this blog post are honestly pretty solid books. And to that point, you might want to check these out to see whether they fit with your collection. The very first book that our blogger talks about is Amazing Spider-Man issue number 334. Now, what makes this book special is that this is actually the second appearance of the Sinister Six. Their first appearance was almost 3 decades earlier in Amazing Spider-Man Annual issue number 1. I mean, that's a big gap between these two books, and in many ways, the second appearance of the Sinister Six is a book that is not really talked about. People really are not focusing on this book. And if you believe all of the rumors and all of the speculation, we could potentially see the Sinister Six in the MCU. And because a lot of people are priced out of Amazing Spider-Man Annual issue number 1, this second appearance of the team could potentially be hot. Now, what's really interesting about this book is that a CGC 9.8 of this book sells for $80. That's right, it is going for $80. And I can tell you, it is a far cry from Annual issue number 1 in terms of value. Speaking of being priced out of comics, that actually brings us to the next book that our blogger talks about. Because in some ways, a lot of people are priced out of being able to buy the first appearance of Aquaman. That is, if you can even find a copy of More Fun Comics issue number 73. Now, with that said, the blogger points out the fact that the DC movies probably are not done with Aquaman, given the fact that the movie grossed roughly $1 billion. And to that point, the blogger highlights that you may want to check out the first Silver Age appearance of Aquaman, which is much more affordable than More Fun Comics issue number 73. Aquaman's first appearance in the Silver Age is Adventure Comics issue number 260. And when you start to look at the FMV associated with this book, it is actually pretty affordable. A CGC 7.5 copy of this book sold in September of this year for only $575. In November of this year, a 5.5 copy actually sold for $193. So again, if you believe that there is some magic to be made with Aquaman in the future, this potentially could be a book that you want to check out. The very last book that our blogger talks about is related to Thor. And I'm not going to give you the details of this one because I want to encourage you to check out the blog post for yourself. What the Fudge is a politically correct version of the title of our next blog post. And I actually had an opportunity to sit down with this blogger recently on the Behind the Blog podcast. And if you haven't yet checked us out on Spotify or on Apple, I definitely want to encourage you to check it out. This is a podcast that comes out every single Sunday for your listening pleasure. But the last time that I spoke with the blogger, we had a great conversation about a raw copy of Albedo issue number 2 that went for a pretty interesting amount of money. And he's back now talking about that very same book, but this time it is a 9.0 CGC copy. The blogger actually points out that this is a book that a lot of people want to get their hands on, but unfortunately, there are not a whole lot of copies out there to be had. But in this blog post, he highlights that a 9.0 recently sold for $7,000. Now, that isn't a crazy amount of money when you think about the kinds of money that are being thrown around right now for comics. But what makes it interesting is that this book went for more than $2,000 above the most recent sales price for the exact same grade. What the fudge? If you want to get the details, you want to check out the blog post. It's linked in the description. So this next blog post I think is a really awesome one because it is different. It is creative in my opinion, and I haven't seen anything like this thus far. What the blogger did is, instead of looking at a individual book or even a series of books, the blogger looked at some story arcs, one from Marvel and one from DC, and basically compared the story arcs to one another. And I might as well tell you what we're talking about here. We are specifically talking about Secret Wars for Marvel, which was set up and designed to sell toys. And on the DC side, we are talking about Crisis on Infinite Earths. And this story arc was designed to help DC to basically clean up its various universes. If you've read these two stories, you might agree that Marvel's Secret Wars has probably had more lasting impact on Marvel than Crisis on Infinite Earths has had on DC. And I say that because when you think about what came out of Secret Wars, it was the black costume. And the black costume became Venom, and Venom became Carnage, and Carnage became Null, and everything that came from that, which is a lot of what we are seeing from Donny Cates right now. On the other side, we definitely saw some heroes and some villains die, but we've also seen DC rejigger and change things up in the ensuing decades from Crisis on Infinite Earths. And for that reason, I think our blogger is kind of leaning towards Secret Wars, as am I. The other thing that the blogger did was that they tabulated up the fair market values of all 12 issues of each story arc. And what you see when you dig into the data is that at a 9.6, Crisis on Infinite Earths currently has a respectable value at $883, according to GoCollect. In comparison, the 12 issues of Secret Wars at a 9.6 basically has a value that is twice that of Crisis at $1,835. So to some degree or another, there is a general feeling here that Secret Wars might be the more significant of the two story arcs. And if you believe some of the rumors that are out there, we may eventually see Secret Wars being made into a movie as well, which will create a bigger divide between these two significant stories from Marvel and from DC. As I mentioned, the blog post is linked down in the description. You might want to check this one out. It's been a couple of weeks since we had the Disney Investor Day, and I'll be honest with you, it took me at least a week or so to kind of process through all of the information that was unloaded on us in those various presentations. But our next blogger does a pretty solid job of pulling a few threads of things that were mentioned during Investor Day, specifically the idea of Gore the God Butcher appearing in the Thor movie, as well as the Fantastic Four, Marvel's first family coming into the MCU. There's been a lot of speculation about that. And the blogger does a really solid job of pointing us in a direction. What I'm specifically talking about is the fact that when Fox had the Fantastic Four, they basically did the coming of Galactus, the Galactus trilogy, specifically Fantastic Four 48, 49, and 50. And to that point, what the MCU may decide to do is to go in a slightly different direction, to not do the Galactus trilogy. And to that point, if they go that route, then what will they do? Might they pull in Silver Surfer Black? Might they tap into the Black Winter and also Null? If they do, there's a couple of books you might want to check out. The very first book that the blogger talks about is Silver Surfer Black issue number 1, by the very talented Donny Cates. And the belief here is that we might actually get a standalone Silver Surfer movie in which we dig into the origins of the Silver Surfer, which leads to Null and Gore the God Butcher. The other thing that the blogger talks about is that we might actually see the origins of Galactus, but specifically as it ties and relates to the Black Winter, which had its first mention in Thor issue number 169. And I'll mention here that the first full appearance of the Black Winter was actually in Thor issue number 5, also by Donny Cates. While we're on this topic of Gore the God Butcher and the Black Winter and Silver Surfer Black, you have to talk about Null, who actually had his first appearance in another Donny Cates comic, specifically Venom issue number 3. Now, what's really great about this blog post is that the blogger is basically giving us a few things to think about. And he is saying that maybe they won't continue just using the Silver Age material as a source. They might tap into some of the more modern stuff. So there you have it. We have reached the end of another recap video. I hope that you enjoyed this video. And if you did, I want to encourage you to hit the thumbs up button and leave a comment behind, and tune in next week when we get to do this all over again.